doing today? That was pretty weak right before lunchtime. Let me try that one again. How y'all doing today? There we go. That's a little bit more of a response. I think we are starting a little bit early, but hopefully some people will filter in as time goes on. Thank you so much for having me. I brought a prop today. Have you ever tried to build a structure with a set of playing cards? Has anybody done that? Yeah, there's a few hands up in the audience. It takes a very steady hand to lay the cards. And if you don't manage to balance everything just right, one small mistake in precision sends the whole thing tumbling down. Building on top of third-party systems to make your system can sometimes feel like building on top of a house of cards, especially when you don't know about the skill or the precision of the people who built those other systems. One misconfiguration or a breach, and the whole thing comes tumbling down. Hi there, I'm Laura Santamaria, lead developer advocate at Dell Technologies, and today I'm here to chat with you about the allures and the dangers of third-party tooling. The thing kind of wants to work. We're thinking about it. The slides will eventually go. So let's start out with a few horror stories, shall we? There are so many, including the most recent one in late 2023 with the Okta hack that you may have heard of. But let's stick to those familiar ones, the ones that send some shivers down your spine. Now, I was hoping for better weather to kind of send more shivers down your spine. It's a little bit warmer, but we'll take what we can get. So, first up, eventually, there we go. Ooh, hey. It's moving on a little faster than I intended. There we go. Heartbleed. And vulnerability in OpenSSL, a software library that uses TLS and SSL to secure communications between servers, was introduced by the Heartbeat extension in 2012 and ended up exposing hundreds of thousands of web servers. In short, the code failed to check and sanitize user input, which allowed an attacker to request and receive a little bit of extra memory, a memory leak. Therefore, any server running the affected code would drop chunks of recently changed data as part of a simple "Are you there?" response if the user input parameters were malformed, leaving open transactions or any other sensitive data available to a savvy attacker. Many people relied on, and still rely on, OpenSSL to secure their web servers. This was a major bug, and it was introduced accidentally. Many people just didn't realize the danger. While the vulnerability itself was discovered and patched in 2014, this horror story, if I can talk today, shows one way that there are some dangers using third-party tooling. Next up, there's the sunburst hack that, through exploitation of vulnerabilities in Microsoft and possibly VMware, there's still some research happening, managed to hack into the supply chain of a product called SolarWinds Orion, and from there affected customers like the US government. The hack falls under a category known as a supply chain attack, where someone targets a weak link in an underlying system that eventually delivers the actual product they're hoping to affect. In this case, attackers snuck a process to open a backdoor into the SolarWinds Orion update system and sign that process with a certificate using compromised credentials. After a short period of time post-update, it phoned home, downloaded more software, and opened up the back door to the attackers. All in all, this specific hack is possibly one of the most well-known supply chain attacks in recent memory. Another supply chain attack came from a very different direction in the 2013 Target hack. When Target was breached in 2013, the attackers gained access through the credentials from a heating and air conditioning supply contractor. No, I'm not kidding, and I'm not making this up. There were no safeguards in place to prevent attackers from using those credentials to work their way through the system and eventually access point-of-sale terminals in Target stores. Now, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here and dig into the history of all supply chain attacks out there. However, this does show just how much the reliance on the stability and security of a third-party supplier without mitigation strategies left many people vulnerable. Horror story number 4 focuses more on what happens if you don't quite know what you depend on. And that story is comprised of one tiny NPM module, LeftPad. Now, the Node devs out there in the room may be shuddering right now, but for those of you not familiar with the story, here's the gist. NPM heavy-handedness made a lone dev with 273 modules to their name a little bit annoyed. So he decided to unpublish all of his packages from NPM, including this tiny little module called LeftPad, which write justified text in 17 lines of code. Many other packages on NPM relied on this tiny little package, a lot of them unknowingly, and that included Babel, or Babel, depending on who you're talking to, a very, very popular JavaScript library at the time. When the dev removed LeftPad from NPM on the 22nd of March, 2016, hundreds of thousands of web servers began to fall over because they were used to pulling that code down live whenever they went to get stood up. All because of this tiny little package that simplified write justifying text into a simple callable function. And the fallout from LeftPad continues to this very day, as just at the beginning of this year, a package was uploaded to NPM as a prank. And I'm going to put that in quotes. That package, called everything in NPM as a dependency. There's a slight problem with this. And I hear a lot of you giggling. I'm sure you know where this is going. Because of the changes NPM implemented to prevent another LeftPad from taking down the entire internet, no package could be removed from NPM if another package called on it as a dependency. So that included accidental uploads, experiments, malicious misspellings. Nothing could be taken down from NPM. Slight problem. They fixed it, don't worry. But maybe don't use Node. I won't go into that. There were many articles after LeftPad asking if we've lost our way, because we're relying so heavily on other people's code without knowing how it works. And I think rightfully so. Doot. Doot. Hey, thank you. But I want to go farther and pose a different question. Why? Why do we rely so much on third-party systems without knowing how they work? It's a problem found throughout our industry. And I think it's extremely prevalent on teams in the cloud-native space. But it's not unique to our industry. Supply chains the world over deal with quality issues from third-party suppliers so much that they have entire quality control divisions that monitor and inspect third parties. It's so prevalent in our world to rely on someone else that we have entire fables and cultural stories about failure due to blind reliance on a third party. We even have phrases that have wormed their way into our language that talk about the same thing, like standing on the shoulders of giants. What is the allure, and I'm sorry to be doing this to you right before lunch. What is the allure of third-party tooling? Why do we use them so heavily? And why do we rely on third parties so much in our culture? We love third-party tools because fundamentally, we can't know everything well. Third-party tools allow us to move at speed. We don't need to produce unique solutions, and we don't need to figure out all the problems that someone else already has dug into. For example, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we can plug that solution in and move on, turning our minds to the parts that we need to put together ourselves, even if it's just some connective tissue between two Stack Overflow posts. Third-party tools also sometimes allow us to shift the liability of problems to someone else. If it's really something we know nothing about, we hand off the problem to a known third party who has expertise that we don't have and wash our hands of any resultant problems that might arise. Again, in the most positive light, we know what we don't know that we don't know. I think I got that right. And act accordingly. Third-party tools reduce cognitive overload, allowing us to smell the roses a little bit more. When we're building out modern systems, we often have 1,000,001 decisions to go through and plates to keep spinning. We have a lot of considerations to keep in mind as we start putting things together. And third-party systems allow us to offload that complexity to someone else. We hope and trust that that other person or those people who built that out know what they're doing and have dealt with that problem before. Now, that last statement, I'm going to get out of the way of my little thing, should have left some alarm bells ringing. Beneath the allure is a significant amount of danger when it comes to reliance on third-party tools. First, what happens when your third-party system goes down? No one is immune from incidents. It's a fact of operations. Can your system continue to function without this third-party system? Or can your platform at least provide a subset of the functions and have them continue to work? What about if the third-party system isn't up to a high standard of quality? You might not have enough insight into the platform to know whether the people do good code reviews. You might not know their testing infrastructure or how good their runbooks are. You can't possibly audit everything. What if your third-party system is breached or simply just fails? No one is immune from breaches or failures or errors. All platforms are built by humans after all, and we're not perfect. Do you know enough about the platform to understand where your system is vulnerable and how to fix it quickly? Or at least to understand where your system might also have been breached and then go find some help? When you take on a third-party system, you may have absolutely no knowledge on how it works. If it's just a small library or might be on a sandbox system, that might be okay. However, what happens if you rely on a third-party project that seems like magic, like LeftPad, and it goes down, or is suddenly just magically wiped from the internet? Slight problem. Perhaps you only know to press a button, enter some URLs in, and then press another button to set up a load balancer on your cloud provider. But do you know actually how to set one up normally? If you have to set up a load balancer by yourself? Most of us don't. It's okay. You can admit it. All of these various cases of different danger zones point to a single point of failure for your systems. You. Your own ability or inability to have enough knowledge about how the platform works. Now, I've talked a lot about the dangers of reliance on third parties, but it clearly can't be all that bad. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of systems running out there relying on third-party systems that haven't been breached or exposed yet, right? We hope, maybe. Well, the key to using third-party systems and tools safely is a combination of evaluation, protection, and mitigation. First things first. Whenever you bring in a third-party tool, you need to know the risks and trade-offs through the evaluation of possible potential solutions. You need to know enough about how a system or a platform actually works to make an honest evaluation on how to reduce any risk that you have. It's really, in the end, a question of risk and reward and an understanding of your personal ring of trust. If you're working on a system that's a general proof of concept, you probably aren't looking at much risk to worry about. But, I mean, we all know that proof of concepts end up on prod when we're in a hurry, right? It's kind of a standard thing. Yes, you can admit it. If what you're using is a heavily used third-party system, like something on your favorite cloud hosting provider, there's probably a little bit less risk, and there's a higher trust in the system. Many popular open source projects, like Kubernetes, are lower risk simply because thousands of people set eyes on the code daily during code reviews or anything like that. And you can look at the code yourself. Now, that doesn't mean there's no risk at all, as Heartbleed proved. But a complex system that maybe costs you a lot of money to run at your small scale probably is worth the trade-off of having a third-party hosting provider or third-party system running it, so long as you understand how it works enough to protect and mitigate against any potential problems. So, how can you protect your system from third-party tooling gone awry? Sandboxes or isolation environments help a lot if you can manage to have one. Now, I know lots of people love to rain on Jenkins. I do myself. But Jenkins does have a groovy sandbox that isolates any potentially vulnerable scripts as well as plugins, preventing it from accessing the rest of your system. That's the kind of system that you need. Another protection layer is to set up audit logs, read-only ones, whenever any system accesses another. Do that and then set up automation to identify and update those vulnerable dependencies as soon as a CVE and patch are issued, and to know exactly what's accessing anything where. For Heartbleed, the best protection at the time was to update quickly. For Target and similar supply chain attacks, protection would have come from providing sandboxes and isolation environments for any third party accessing the system, enabling better monitoring and the ability to wall off any potential problems quickly. When something you relied on goes bad, though, you should have some mitigation strategies up your sleeve. For example, separate systems to ensure that anything that might get compromised doesn't compromise your entire stack or application. The classic separation of concerns principle. One way to do that is ensuring that any system connects to other systems via APIs, and they don't necessarily connect directly all to the same database, just as an example. Additionally, those read-only audit logs are also a mitigation strategy as well as a protective one. They help you have an inkling on what could have gotten breached and how far you have to go to change things to save yourself from a vulnerability quickly. Another mitigation strategy: have failover systems or redundant separate systems ready to go in case of a high-risk system failing. For example, let's say, just for fun, you decide to go with a new untried Heroku clone for your production cluster. I'm not judging you, by the way. If you're going to do that, have a backup system running on a long-running, well-trusted hosting provider in case the new system goes down. And don't wait to test the failover process when the stakes are high, either. Let it run with a production load at some point and ensure that it works as expected. If you can't afford to do that, at least have your strategy mapped out, lest you become another horror story. In the case of Heartbleed or other similar situations, you should always run your updates for your third-party patches as soon as it is reasonable to do so. In addition, rotating keys, certificates, any system like that provides that kind of verification, do it routinely, because that ensures that, should your systems get compromised, you're less likely to be affected continuously down the road. To mitigate against a problem in your supply chain, like anything from sunburst to leftpad, a software bill of materials, or SBOM, is an extremely useful tool. We've learned from the manufacturing world that a bill of materials helps quickly identify a defective component in a supply chain. In the same way, a software bill of materials identifies all of the dependencies of a system, as well as any subdependencies and interconnected relationships across the entire system. While we can use SBOMs to scan for and patch vulnerabilities immediately in our highly connected, dependent, cloud-based world, we also can use them to track back what might have been compromised in the event of a breach to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself. If we want to ensure that we don't have a situation like leftpad, we can use an SBOM to lock down to a known good state. To mitigate a breach like sunburst, we can find the offending package quickly by drilling down into those dependencies and isolate it, using that data to ensure that a repeated installation doesn't actually happen. In the end, I don't want you to be afraid of third-party systems. On the contrary, they can be remarkably beneficial because they help us move at speed and reduce cognitive overload. But don't blindly pick up a third-party system just because everyone else is doing so. Don't fall for shiny object syndrome. Understand roughly how it works and why. Evaluate the trade-offs of taking something off the shelf versus building it yourself. And use that information to protect your systems and mitigate any problems that might arise. With that understanding in place, hopefully you won't become the next horror story that a senior engineer tells to their wide-eyed colleagues. After all, we build on these third-party systems just fine, and usually they do a great job. So go ahead, build that sparkling new house that you're trying to build on top of third-party systems. But maybe use real construction materials, not simply a deck of playing cards. Thank you so much. Should have time for questions. I think I did that right.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Questions,
I have a
comments?
microphone. Maybe I can see when people raise their hands. Okay.
I see a question over here.
Okay. Thank you, Laura, for helping me find the question.
I'm just going to dance up here on stage.
Excuse the reach.
Hi. How much of the problem do you think
is from the monetization system. Like, I worked for a company that produced third-party apps, and what we produced could have just been like a static library that could be downloaded and run on someone else's server. But you can't monetize that. You can't bill monthly for something they only have to download once. So instead, we stood up our own server and had everything running live, and if our server goes down, suddenly the third-party app doesn't work. It's a whole new vulnerability. But
that's a great question. So I'm gonna reiterate it back to you to make sure I got it. Basically, how much does it matter that we're doing as a service for everything? Ooh, that's a hard one. I have to say that I'd probably say maybe, I'm not even going to try to give a percentage. It can be a good thing because it provides an incentive to update from the developer standpoint. It can say, like, let's make sure that there's no vulnerabilities. Let's make sure there's patches. I mean, how many people here have looked for, like, the perfect open source package and found out that it hasn't been updated in 5 years? Lots of us. I mean, it's a thing. But the fact is that in doing so, also they're moving a little too fast half the time. And that, I think, is where a lot of these vulnerabilities come in. People are in a hurry because they are monetizing it. They want to keep people coming. They want to do the feature thing. They don't want to deal with the tech debt that they're building. So I think it's a little bit of a trade-off. Personally, and I'm speaking for me personally, not my employer, I prefer the let me download it, let me use it. I don't want to have to pay you every single time. But that's my take. I think that there are some trade-offs and some risks and evaluations you do have to actually measure when you're thinking that. Good question, though.
Okay, right over here.
Oh, no, a troublemaker.
So how do we square use of third-party tools when now it's no longer like a library we're using or something like that, and it's code that we copied and pasted out of ChatGPT, and we don't know its provenance?
All right, thank you so much for your time. I'm out of here. No, so I have a love-hate relationship with code from ChatGPT. I understand that it can be very useful for a lot of beginners. My issue is that most of the stuff it was trained on was Stack Overflow, random GitHub repos, and whatever else you can think of. And how reliable are they? Anybody want to take a guess? I can tell you, as somebody who does Python a lot of the coding practices are not correct. So I don't know about ChatGPT. I don't typically use it for coding, but I think when it comes to that kind of a situation, there's a lot more mitigation you need to do. I don't think you can just copy paste it and use it. I know a lot of people are using it for junior engineers just to kind of do pair programming. I don't think that really replicates the same experience as someone who's experienced in the language walking them through a problem. That's my personal take. Maybe it'll get better, but I think, again, the same risk mitigation strategies, the same evaluation of what you're willing to trust. Is it a production system? Are you running it just in dev? Is it a sandbox? All of those same things apply.
Okay, we got one right here.
Sure.
Hey, Laura.
Hi.
This is Deepak. Building on to this question, right? Today, in our software supply chain, we have open source coming from so many different sources, right? Developers using it. We get software from third-party sources, obviously the co-pilots and the ChatGPT. What are some of the best practices in terms of, like, if I just have to have a comprehensive view of all the open source that I'm using internally so that I can start monitoring it? Like, do you have any pointers or tips in terms of how do I go about aggregating this inventory, managing it, monitoring it?
Okay, so your question is, how do you make sure that all of the third-party stuff that is getting into your systems, you know what it is, you know what it's doing, and you know why it's there and where it lives? What is the state of the art on that? There are a lot of third-party tools out there to take care of that. Generally, I find that the more you, I'm going to answer the people problem first. Encourage people to do it in the open. That's the very first thing. If they think they have to go, hide that somewhere in like 30,000 other repos so that I can't find it, that makes everyone's job so much harder. So if you encourage them to first work in the open, they feel a little more willing to let you know what they've actually built and where it came from. So that's probably my very first statement. Because no matter how many tools you use and processes you put in place, the people will always figure out a way around it. People problems always first. But then when you come down to the tools themselves, there are a couple of scanning tools, and they are skipping my mind right now. Standard underlight stage thing. I'm trying to think what you want to search for is it's like an open source scanner. I want to say it's Trivi, but that's not right. My brain is melting. Come find me. I will give you the actual names of those tools, but look for them. They are out there. There are third-party tools that will scan any GitHub repo that you put in, and they look for anything that has an open source license. They compare it against other code. They try to pull in that kind of information. So there are automation. There is tooling, automation, things that help you figure that out. But to me, the bigger thing is figure out the people problem first, because so many people think that they're not allowed to because they think they're going to get in trouble, because they don't have an open source policy at the company. But also, you end up with situations where they think they're going to get fired because they couldn't figure out the problem on their own. I hate to tell you, most senior engineers don't reinvent the wheel. We go look it up on Stack Overflow too, and half the time we find our responses to someone's post that had the same question from experience. We got a question up here, or do we have one more time? Come find me after.
To the hallway track and just ask her
Yeah,
right after?
find me after.
Okay, because I think we have to keep this thing, we're keeping people from lunch.
Yeah.
Is the problem.
Well, I'm sorry. I'll let you all go eat.
But can we please thank Laura? What a great talk. Oh my gosh, great information and great slides.
Thank you.
Loved your slides. I